There are two different methods for seaming commercial vinyl sheet flooring. One method, heat welding, which will be addressed in this video, creates an aseptic environment as well as provides for different visual designs. The second method, S761 seam adhesive, used for non-aseptic areas, will be shown in another video. Heat welding is a skill that requires knowledge of both the necessary equipment and the procedure. The equipment consists of an electric groover, a heat welding gun, a roller nozzle or a narrow tip speed nozzle, a recessed scriber, a hand groover, skiving knives, and a skiving plate. After installing the first piece of material, prepare the seam edge by trimming approximately a ½ inch off the factory edge. Install the second piece of material, allowing for approximately a ½ inch overlap at the seam edge. Using the proper adhesive, we're going to spread the adhesive with the proper notch trowel and provide the proper open time for the adhesive. Place the material into the adhesive, being sure not to exceed the working time of the adhesive. Once the material is placed into the adhesive, roll the material in both directions with a 100-pound roller. Using your recessed scriber, scribe and cut the seam, leaving approximately a 64th inch gap in the seam. This will make it easier to groove the seam. Once the seam is cut, re-roll with a 100-pound roller. It is important to wait a minimum of 10 hours for the adhesive to dry prior to heat welding. Complete the heat welding within 24 hours of the installation. Router groove the seam to 2/3 the depth of the vinyl. Use an electric router equipped with a 3.5 millimeter thick blade. In areas where an electric router cannot be used, use a hand router. Routed seam should be free of dirt, adhesive, and particles produced by routing. When using pattern weld rod, the heat gun temperature will need to be set slightly higher than the temperature normally used for solid colored welding rod. This temperature is approximately 500 to 550 degrees centigrade. A heat gun with an infinitely adjustable temperature control will make the job easier. This will also help to prevent tear-offs. Practice on a piece of scrap material with the correct nozzle to determine the correct setting and welding speed. After the heat gun has been preheated, attach the nozzle. Starting with a cold nozzle will prevent softening of the weld rod as it passes through the nozzle and will make tear-offs less likely also. Practice welding on a piece of scrap material before starting your first job to determine the proper speed and adjust for the higher temperature setting. When welding commercial vinyl sheet flooring, it is important to use a narrow tip nozzle and proper speed to prevent burning of the material. When properly welding commercial vinyl sheet flooring, you will be able to see a ridge building up on both sides of the weld rod. This will ensure a properly welded seam. Once the first part of the seam is welded, you will need to change directions. Make a ramp by skiving the weld rod 1 to 2 inches from the end of the welded seam. Hand groove the skived section of the weld rod. From the opposite direction, continue welding up the ramp and overlap the initial weld for several inches, creating a splice. Skiving the weld rod should be done in 2 passes to minimize concave seams. For the first pass, use a skiving knife and a trim plate, skiving away the top part of the weld rod while it is still warm. After the welding rod has cooled to room temperature, skive the remaining weld rod on the second pass by holding the skiving knife flush with the floor. Smooth, continuous passes result in a smooth seam. Repeated start and stop action results in rough seams. After the final skive, wipe the seam with a clean, damp cloth. Solid weld rod can also be used for commercial vinyl sheet flooring. When welding with solid weld rod, the same procedures would be used as welding with the pattern weld rod, for the exception of the heat gun temperature. The temperature of the heat gun should be set at approximately 400 to 450 degrees centigrade for the solid weld rod. This picture shows an improperly welded seam that would typically be not acceptable to the end user. When correctly done, heat welding provides the following benefits. It creates an aseptic seam, it allows for heavy traffic, and allows for unique visual designs with complementary or contrasting colorations. Be sure to follow all installation instructions when heat welding, and visit Armstrong.com for more information.